today. I'm very excited to be talking to Bill Westhead, and we're going to be talking about taking a bit of a focus on a regional perspective today. So welcome, Bill.
Thanks very much for having me, Mark.
Excellent. So, I mean, one of the things we got around to speaking to you, Bill, is that you've been a president of the Warragul RSL.
Yes.
And I think you may have handed that over recently, but you've been extremely involved in a number of initiatives in your local community that involve VicPol, obviously the RSL, and you've been advocating for a few things into the government as well.
Yeah, Warragul's in central Gippsland, and a beautiful spot. The veteran community came to younger veterans, of which I'm the oldest of them, and said, we're going to close the RSL unless you guys step up. So we started, that was in 2017. So we had to do a business plan, and we went, and when I say we, there was a couple of people I knew, and we found that the first responders, fireys, ambos and police, quite a number were double dippers, are involved at the local gym. And so we moved all those things into the RSL with a formalised, modernised management structure, and with the view to integrating the veteran community and making it prosper. Now, we've done that at some cost, I might add, as in personal cost. It's pretty much been a full-time job. To open the doors, it costs us $23K a year. We have no employees. We don't do food. We have just started a bar, and that will be an income producer. And we obviously don't have pokies. We're a 10B. Yeah. 250 members, of whom half are of service, and quite a number of widows and legatees. And the age is representative of the RSL demographic, you know, over 65 in the main, although we've recruited a large number of younger people in.
So as a 10B club, how do you obtain the revenue you need to open the doors of that $23,000 a year?
Well, the key issues for us are membership, Anzac Day and Remembrance Day, plus functions and donations. And we've been fortunate to receive good donations from Freemasons, RSL Victoria, the largest of the local community. But our appeals are the key ingredient to making sure we've got some cash. And
so good, yeah. So sorry to interrupt you. So good standing with the local community is very important.
It is essential. We'd like to get it better. We have troubles getting into the schools, some schools. There's a political prejudice there. But in general, the community is extremely generous and considerate.
Excellent. So Bill, one of the things you mentioned was that there was this need to sort of fill the gap because the older generation were looking for younger leadership, and it was a huge challenge to, as you said, to step up, and they were considering closing the Warragul RSL. Is that a common issue in the regions, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And you go to the regional meetings, you know, usually one of the youngest at those regional meetings, and I'm 67. And you have a look at the New South Wales experience, they've only got 1,000 members under the age of 50. And that's the huge issue for our future. Now, the RSL shouldn't close its doors because of the background that it's had and the history that it's had. So the centre of gravity is the younger veteran, and we need to bring in the younger veterans to make the RSL continue to be relevant and service them. So that's been the focus.
Yeah.
The link between coppers, fireys and ambos is very, very strong because of two reasons. One, a number of double dippers. There's quite a number of our people have been in both organised, so service with the ADF and than emergency services. The other thing is that as we continue domestic operations like COVID and fires and the like, that link is stronger and stronger. And I think the RSL needs to look at formalising that link in the future.
That'd be probably quite important when you consider how important organisations such as the CFA are in some of those regional communities as well. They're quite central to the social fabric of some regional towns.
Like footy clubs.
Yeah.
You know, it's the building block of local society, and the relationships have got to be nurtured and carefully managed. And the CFA, that's a political issue. The CFA is one of those political issues that need to be managed carefully.
Yeah, okay. And so what do you think are the key to finding and attracting young veterans outside of obviously finding the double dippers and bringing them into it? Because there must be many out there who just aren't sort of engaged in some of that, some of those community activities either.
We estimate that both DVA and the RSL only pick up about 20 to 30% of veterans that are in the community. And how do we do that? How do we get a profile? Well, we've got to become relevant, and we've got to engage with the community, and we've got to get the veteran to want to come to the RSL by providing the service. And the service that we provide, apart from the fellowship, is actually getting things done in their interest. We have increased our numbers over the last 3 years, and even in this period this year, we've had a net gain, and that's despite the fact that nearly 30 of our members have died over that period, you know, because of the age and the illnesses that they have. So word spreads. These guys are doing a reasonable job, and they're providing relevance to the RSL. We're providing relevance to the potential member.
Yeah. So what we were talking about before we recorded this interview is just some of the gaps that you're filling at the moment out there, and it's more than just the desire to keep the RSL open for the sake of keeping it open. You're actually fulfilling a very important role out in the regional community. And could you tell us a little bit more about that, and maybe give us an example of a success story or a challenging story where you've had to play a key role in supporting someone or a family or whatever?
Mark, let me say that this is a challenge. Yeah. We are actually doing the work and picking up the pieces of both ADF and DVA in particular, and being in the bush, despite the fact that we're on a major highway and a rail line, and only 150k from Melbourne, there is no direct contact with DVA. Medical services are difficult. Mental health services are poor. And the management of the individual veteran who has injuries. And to give you some context, I think I've got 70% of our members who have PTSD. Now that's cross-generational. It's not confined to us. It's across the servicemen and women. And to get support for the management of those cases is difficult. I have one veteran who had 17 bona fide injuries and 9 practitioners. And he mapped out his activities, and they took 240 days of appointments. And his wife is doing that work. That's DVA's work. So I brought that to the attention of DVA, and I used the political connections to make sure that DVA attended to that. Now, in the end, the only people who are responsible for to the community are the politicians. So we've got to speak to our local politicians to get these things done. And to give credit where credit's due, Darren Chester, who is only down the road in Sale, has intervened on our behalf on a number of occasions and been excellent.
Yeah, so I suppose in some ways you're very lucky having that minister just down the road, but that may not be the case for people in other parts of the country.
No, but so your local member is the person who's the conduit to DVA.
It's a pretty fraught pathway to get to what you would think would be normal support, isn't it? Because you've got, number one, you've got to get their attention and grab their interest and find their time and that kind of thing, and they're notoriously difficult to tie down. So
they are, but in the bush they tend to listen.
Yeah, so it's not a great solution. Is I guess what I'm trying to say. And so one of the things that you're talking about is the work that you do for the local community, and we talk about advocacy a lot in relation to RSL, and there's what people are now starting to call capital A or big A advocacy, where you're talking about the big issues, and then you talk about the small things, so the things that actually affect an individual, and you lobby for them and their issues, such as the example you gave there. Are you do you think as a regional RSL, are you across the spectrum of that type of advocacy, and do you see a bigger role maybe for RSL in regional locations, or perhaps should some of that be lifted and supported by state headquarters such as Victoria or New South Wales or wherever else?
Our constitution and rules specify that we are to advocate on defence and welfare issues for veterans, and we don't do that enough. I have gone out of my way to tell the community that we are, as veterans, the tools of government. And in the end, government has responsibility for how we're employed and how we're looked after. You know, we don't make those decisions. We operate under government guidance. Yeah. And the government is the people, and the people need to understand how their government operates. And I've gone out of my way to broadcast that via lectures and presentations and Anzac Day and the like. And in the end, we would say to the people, we are here, we've served our country, we are injured, we need your assistance. And I've just had a couple of medical issues myself, and I rang a local paper and said, look, I'm handing over, blah, blah, blah. And they were excellent in their compassion and their support, and they'll spread the word. Yeah. We have to spread the word into the community, and that's by the kids, schools, and advocate for veterans generally, and tell the community what we've done.
So, I mean, advocacy is very important. We can all come up with a list of problems and things that we want to fix, but if we haven't got the engagement to start with, then we've got a real problem in communicating that and getting the attention of the community. And I guess this is one of the things that we've been talking about a little bit at ADN, is about and I think we're going to touch on this later in this conversation, about the call for a Royal Commission into veteran suicides and the upcoming inquiry and so forth. I think that's a topic I'd like to just park for a second, but the point of that discussion is that there's this need for engagement, and I think the engagement piece, particularly from large organisations such as RSL right across Australia, is actually very important if it's going to actually maintain its relevance. So, what do you think about some of the ideas that have been put forward in recent changes? Okay, let's keep it focused on our local area in Victoria. So there's veteran hub ideas, those sorts of things. Are they going to go far enough to improve the advocacy and the engagement with the community?
Well, from my perspective, the most important part of advocacy of the RSL brand is a national voice. And we need to reconcile our individual state constitutions, branch constitutions, and we need to have be on the same page at the states and the federal level. And we're not. I know the players, I know the people, and they're people of goodwill, but we have this Australian internal border issue that we see with COVID, and we've got to reconcile that. We need to go and be the brand that the veterans want to work to, and we don't do that after you've finished your service. We do that at the start of your service.
That's interesting that you say that, because I mean, most of us, well, I do at least. I've got one of my children is in the ADF, you know, there's no way he's going to join. I can't see him wanting to join the RSL unless I really give him a push. And if I give him a push, he'll probably definitely won't join the RSL. So, you know, you got those sorts of issues. But you know, it's really interesting just thinking about you know, I guess the need for improving that engagement across the board, because it's difficult. It's extremely difficult because not everybody agrees. You know, I mean, we take the call for Royal Commission, for example. Some people think that what's been proposed is by the government at the moment is a reasonable idea, and many actually disagree with it. And there's not a lot of middle ground on that issue, unfortunately. And I don't see how that's going to you know, be resolved very easily. And you know, I've certainly got my views, and I think they're well known about that. But you know, I do certainly respect the views of others, and I think the more we understand the perspectives, the better solutions we can come up with.
And we're suffering from veteran suicide and veteran illness and veteran injury now, but this is not unusual. Historically, we've had similar problems after all our major conflicts. What we are not doing is looking after our people during service, immediately after service, and particularly for the younger people, a lot of these problems won't manifest for 10 years. Mm. So my grandfather was wounded at H plus 30 seconds at Gallipoli.
Yeah. And
he was looked after until the mid-90s. So your strategic approach for management of veterans has to be, you have to look a century down the track.
Yeah, and you've got to be a lot more, I think, sophisticated and nuanced. I've been looking at some of the plans that have come out of various ex-service organisations about, you know, transition pathways and things like that, but they sort of assume some kind of a linear approach to things. And the research that I've been involved in and some of the other papers I've read, it shows that quite a lot of veterans and you know, I guess it impacts the families as well, is that there's a delayed effect. I mean, sometimes these things don't manifest until much later, and they become a real problem, you know, 10, 15, 20 years after the service. And this idea that you catch them at this point in time when they're making the transition, whatever that means, right? That particular shift from being ADF to civilian is where it all happens. And I'm not quite sure that we really understand the life journeys of our people and what they need as they go through their life course.
If we don't look after our veterans during service and post-service, then what does that say to the community when they offer up their children to come and serve in the military? It says you're disposable. And we can't be disposable because we have a very narrow gene pool for service in the military. We've got to look after people, and that's being honest. Most of the ADF identifies welfare issues and injury issues, but we've parked them to the side because it affects promotion and it affects deployment, and you know, it's not operational. We have to look after the veteran when he is in the ADF, so we can transition him to a useful life post. Now, for some people, that's going to be very difficult. For our bloke who's got 17 injuries,
yeah,
we just don't cast them off and say, you know, you're no good to us. We've got to look after those people because they will spread the word and say this is really an organisation that looks after its own. Now, how often do you hear in our historical context, once a soldier, always a soldier, once a Marine, always a Marine, once a commando for life, and that sort of stuff?
Yeah.
Well, that's the way the ADF has to think now and look after these people because they have kids, they have relatives, and if those people look up to the ADF as being an organisation that manages people well, then people will want to join it. Abuse it, and people won't want to join it. Mm. And the ADF has got a responsibility here.
Yeah, so let's turn the conversation a little bit to some local initiatives that I'm aware of that you've been involved in, Bill. And one of them that I was particularly interested in was this briefing that you developed for your local VicPol station. And can you give us a bit of background on that, how it came about, and what what happened there and what that was about,
Well,
the result of that, I suppose.
My son's a combat signaller, and he left and joined Victoria Police. And he was working down in Collingwood, and he came across a homeless person who turned out to be ex-service, and he did not have the facility to look after him. So he gave me a ring, and we enacted some things, and it prompted a thought. Well, we need to brief the police first, because they're the people who encounter homeless veterans or veterans in need generally first, and we don't want it to escalate. Now, under the Mental Health Act here in Victoria, if we can't find someone to provide triage treatment for mental health, it's called the police. The police, that's the last resort. So we need to get the police on board. It's easy for us because we have a lot of police. So I went and briefed the local police hierarchy and sergeants and above, inspectors, and then I took it the next step and used my contacts in town to get an assistant commissioner and a commander on board. And then I organised for Open Arms to make direct contact with the police hierarchy. And I believe that they're setting up a SOP, for want of a better term, for police, frontline police, when they encounter a veteran who's in need on the street. So that started, from a young bloke, a 24-year-old, and it's escalated. We have now briefed our entire area with the local police, the local hospital network, the local mental health networks, just to say, this is who we are.
So that's a great example of a grassroots initiative that's obviously built upon or around local relationships, and also obviously the relationship that your son had with VicPol, I guess, opened some of the doors there. What sort of things on the checklist that you think that make a difference to police and attendants of a situation with somebody who's a veteran and finding themselves in a bit of trouble?
Be careful, because we know how to handle ourselves, and and have you got weapons?
Mm-hmm.
Have you got weapons for? We've got to take them out of the veteran's hand, the veteran who's in need. We know how to use weapons. Generally speaking, a veteran will take good leadership from frontline police because they're trained to do that. There's a relationship and respect there. And then we drop into how we can help these guys. We can get you treatment straight away through Open Arms. Can the local RSL help you? Where are you living? Can we get you into some accommodation? Do you need some money? What the RSL does brilliantly is provide immediate assistance for life support, and we can do that locally. We say to the police, don't go weapons and things like that, but give us a ring, we'll deal with it straight away, and we'll use our local contacts. And we want to extrapolate that through the Victorian community, particularly in the bush where everyone knows everyone else, and we can get people treatment and take them away from that danger.
Yeah. Is there an unhelpful stigma with veterans and mental health and weapons and things like that, and sort of create unnecessary alarm and caution, and perhaps an overreaction, I guess, to those risks?
I'm not a professional in that area, and that's another issue. I've been doing work and taking the role of professionals, and that's going to cause legal issues down the line.
Mm.
But we need to take the weapons away from the veteran if they're in trouble, not so much for the danger of the community, but danger to themselves. The veteran feels ashamed that he's been caught out, and is looking to move on. Now we need to look after that by taking that weaponry out of his hands. Yes, there is a stigma, but if he's on the street, homeless, taking drugs and all the rest, he's gone a long way down the track, and we need to help him straight away, and that means getting rid of the weapons.
Yeah. So there's a one of the things you're talking about, Bill, is that there's this in regional locations. You've made the point, you're not that far away. You know, I think you said you're on the electric train line and all the rest of it. So that's pretty good, and I think they've replaced the telegraph with this modern convenience called the internet. So that's pretty good. But it seems that from what you're saying, you're a little bit isolated from DVA and other supports. You know, what's the systemic problem with support to regional areas?
There is none. The DVA management structure is phone call, and that is onerous, particularly for a veteran who's in a spot of bother, because the last thing they want to do is to give out all their information 2 and 3 times.
Yeah.
They don't speak to somebody who has an empathy with them straight up, and there is no management of the condition of the veteran. So what we are seeking is face-to-face, decentralised DVA. Now, the excuse is that that's too expensive and we don't have the numbers. Well, Department of Aboriginal Affairs has had to go to face-to-face and decentralise their services. And by the way, similar numbers, similar budget.
Yeah. So it's inconvenient that veterans actually settle outside of CBD locations then, and you know, I mean, I mean, what you're saying sounds a bit crazy, but we talk about the situation with you know, DVA going through transformations, and I mean, I must admit, I'm a little bit sceptical of it all. It looks like a lot of window dressing to me in terms of new websites and all that kind of thing. The experience and the time lags and the cultural issues within DVA seem to be still there, apart from there's a bit of publicity around it that improves it, I suppose, in terms of perception. But from what you're saying, in the regional locations, you're still as an RSL representative, one of the first points of call, and I guess you're probably a trusted entity, I guess, in your community as well. So that's always going to come to you regardless.
So our nearest DVA contact is a part-timer down at Morwell, which is, you know, 60 k's away.
Yeah.
And as part of Morwell Centrelink. Now you're asking a veteran to go down there to from all over Gippsland. That doesn't work. But there's case management. Now, if you've got a cohort of veterans, and we have, you know, we've got 150 in this area, we know that there's another 1,000 out there.
Yeah.
If you have the face-to-face contact, then you can manage the treatment of those people. You know, our case of a guy with 17 injuries, he's got to have management. And that's the DVA remit. And if you go and have a look at the DVA remit and read the legislation, they are required to do that. Yet, it's been handed off to us, and you know, via Vietnam Veterans Services, who did a wonderful job, and it's become the prime remit for RSLs to look after the welfare and the management of the veteran when it's not their job. It's DVA's job. I'd like to see DVA out here. I'd put up a pilot scheme.
Yeah.
It was approved, but RSL didn't want to come on board with it. They wanted their own system. And I'm convinced that face-to-face DVA management or a hub system will be a benefit to the veteran in the short and medium term.
So there is a strategy within RSL to deploy some hubs and to provide some face-to-face services. I mean, that must be a good thing.
It's where they put the hubs and where the issue is. And the issue initially So we pick up the problem post ADF service. The problem's manifesting in ADF service.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to have a relationship with the ADF. And I say we need to be on base.
Yeah.
And we need to have the DVA with the ADF on base, handing it across to us. So they do all their work, all the work that they're supposed to be doing, they do that. And we become the support mechanism to monitor their performance. We shouldn't be doing the work. I think that we need a hub in Wodonga on base, not off base. Puckapunyal.
Yeah.
There's plenty in Melbourne, plenty of bases in Melbourne, and service. Sale, which is down the track, and that hub should be of 3 components: an ADF component, a DVA component, and an RSL in a volunteer component. To give credit where credit's due, Darren Chester has taken the transition thing and turned it into a command. But you still must have someone commanding that on a base as part of transition.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know when you went through transition. I went through transition, a couple of days in a spot, and this is what goes on and all the rest of it. By the way, get some advice, get all your injuries done, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I didn't get any of that. Just
go back.
It's a paperwork and walked out the front gate and didn't know anything about what's going on. But this is interesting that you're talking about that, because I was just sort of thinking about I haven't been on a military base for a long time now, but I do remember the days of the old Sally Man and all that sort of situation. And I think that the RSL could sort of hook into a role like that. The old hop-in centre, and I mean, I'm sure they might still have those things around, but they played an important role in the morale of our ADF personnel, and they can sort of fulfil something that's just a little bit outside of the command loop. That is very useful to them, particularly if they're starting to think about their options post-service.
Well, if you try and walk out of the army after 10, 15 years and expect to resume life as per normal, you've got another thing coming. The transition is just that. There's a transition phase to civilian life, and a lot of things have got to occur. Plus, if you've trained someone, and this is what we're observing with employment, if you train someone, particularly from a combat background, then their reactions are totally different and an anathema in the community. I've got 3 guys who have just come out of battalions, and fair dinkum, great blokes, but they have not transitioned into the community life. They're looking at people like their targets. They're not. That is so inculcated, and you can always spot a military guy because he talks at a rapid rate, and he's aggressive, and he's self-assured, because that's the way we've developed people. The community doesn't accept that anymore, and if you're going to have a liaison with the community, an effective person in the community, he's got to soften. He's got to take those hard edges away, because now they're illegal. It's bullying, and checking is bullying. So all those edges have got to be changed.
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult problem, because one of the things we talked about is this doesn't just happen in discrete points in time. It actually happens throughout the life course. And, they, at that particular time, your young battalion friends might not even realise that they've got a problem until much later on, where they've, gone through their 3rd or 4th job and, starting to maybe reflect a little bit more on what the issues might be.
And how many calls have you had from the ADF about your condition, if you've got one? I've had no calls from the ADF and no calls from DVA about how my well-being is, and yet here we are supposed to be having a mental health disaster that is well known, and yet no one is checking on veterans to see how they are, except for the RSL, and soldier on and open arms.
It's interesting that they have released a wellbeing strategy, but I haven't seen what the actual actions are going to be. And it looks, and this is the way these things, and this is the, I guess, the fact of bureaucracies and, you know, I guess the thing being run by public servants, it'll eventually come out in its own good time, and the world will move on from there. So we've got that issue, but the wellbeing plan and the actions, it's not very proactive. I agree with you on that. One of the issues I did want to investigate, which relates to wellbeing, but it's important, is the Commissioner for ADF and Veteran Suicide Prevention. I can't remember the proper title, but it's along those lines. The new Commissioner, and there's an inquiry that's connected with that. And there is a very strong call from within the veteran community for a Royal Commission to at least accompany that, if not replace it, because there are some, you know, some inadequacies, I guess, identified with that approach. What's your view from it? With, you know, you've had a little bit to do with it, and you've sort of looked at it from your local, you know, from a local experience, I suppose, and dealing with people in crisis like that.
Well, one, we need some quick attention, very quick attention.
Yeah.
Two, these are systemic historical issues. And as I mentioned to you previously in this conversation, it happened after World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and it's happening now. This appears to be, anecdotally, part and parcel of service, particularly over a long period. So the Commissioner or the Royal Commission needs to understand the historical context. Are we killing ourselves more than the Vietnam cohort? I don't think so, but I don't know. I need to have that evidence.
Yeah.
And only a Royal Commission can provide that evidence in a context. Now, I'm not opposed to, I prefer a Royal Commission, I want it done quickly.
Yes.
I'm opposed to a rolling commission, provided the powers are very similar to a Royal Commission, and that Commissioner reports on a very regular basis. I am opposed to the Commissioner being a member of the military, as she currently is. I think that's an error, because the military establishment, Canberra-based, is a protection society, and we lack that hard, honest, gritty leadership, because we are a society in Canberra. If that's harsh, I'm sorry. The last person that resigned on a point of principle or was punished by the military hierarchy is an ex-CEO of RSL Vic in Brigadier Dighton. No one in the senior leadership has been sacked or resigned on a point of principle that we know of since the mid-80s. Yet our Five Eyes partners have sacked him by the busload. Now, we need to have independence, and I'm not criticising the incumbent. I'm saying it needs to be seen to be independent, and veterans must have confidence in that.
I don't think anybody wants to be critical of the person and her career, Brigadier Boss. But I think you're right. You can't distract us by saying, "Oh, it's Dr. Boss," you know, and you know, not acknowledging the ADF connection. But also, I guess when you look at previous commissioners for Royal Commissions, they are people at a different level, I suppose. And you really, you know, when you've got that initial investigation that needs to go into some very, very complex and difficult areas, you need people with a very different level of experience, I suppose, and a higher level of expectation about what they're going to get out of the process. And it's certainly not to put down the current incumbent, but it's certainly just to say that is this an appropriate person to be fulfilling that duty ongoing? And you know, I personally have my doubts, and I think the community has its doubts. And one of the things that was mentioned to me, actually I spoke to, I think it was Jackie Lambie, mentioned this about a week ago, said that, you know, who's going to front up and talk to a brigadier about their experience with the ADF, you know, and that's the issue. There is a natural barrier there to impartiality and even the perception of it. So in my view, it's a huge mistake to appoint somebody with that background.
Yeah, and I think there are political issues behind that, but the important thing is that we can't wait 2, 3, 4, and 5 years. This is a problem that's occurring now. People are losing their lives now, and we have to be acting quickly and decisively. And just as an adjunct to that, the war crimes investigations, some of these war crimes date back to 2008. That's 12 years. So these have been hanging over servicemen for 12 years. And I was told the other day, some of this will take another 5 to 10 years to process. Justice delayed is justice denied. Yeah. The same applies with the veteran suicide issue. You cannot delay this. We must act decisively and quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, it's not interesting. It's tragic. I was involved in a conversation with the president of Hawthorn RSL. It's a fairly robust group, and they're pretty. They like to voice their view, and I give all the power to them for doing it, because whether you agree with them or not, at least they're out there and they're developing their ideas and they're sharing what they think. And he said that I may misquote him, but it was something like during the COVID crisis, he's been to 4 and supported 4 funerals of veterans who've taken their lives, and he's been to no funerals for anybody who's died from COVID. Now it's probably not a fair example to look at those 2 things and separate them out, but I think it's a serious issue. It is. The more and more this time goes on, and the more and more we delay a Royal Commission, I think the worse it's going to be. And there will be a Royal Commission eventually, because somebody's going to have to front up and decide to do it. And I think I just think it's cowardice on our government's behalf at the moment not to take not to pick it up and do what they need to do, and then not to acknowledge the issue.
As coroners are peeling back the issues, it'll become absolutely plain that you need to have an investigation in what's going on.
Yeah.
And when we talk about waivers, when we talk about war crimes, all this sort of stuff, it'll get peeled back. So get it done with. Change the culture. Get the fixes into the ADF and into DVA now.
Yeah, and look, the other thing is, and I think this all fits in with this whole idea of this coroner level or brigadier level or whatever. Some of the issues that many of us suspect are behind or part of the core problem could potentially link into leadership and culture within the ADF, which is, typically above what people would call a brigadier's pay grade to get involved. So all these issues and perceptions, it requires something, a lot more than just than what's being put in place at the moment, and it needs a very, very serious look for the sake of our current servicemen and women, but also it's required, I suppose, for out of respect to the families who are calling for a Royal Commission and who are prepared to accept the risks and the difficulties and the pain of actually fronting up to one and telling their painful and tragic stories all over again. And if they're prepared to do it, then we should allow them to do it, in my opinion.
Yeah, all we do is repeat history with these cohorts. And I've got to say that some of the people that have been my bosses, particularly over the last 15 years, I've got immense respect for, and I'll look at them, I'll think of them, and their good leadership and immense respect. But others, our focus has moved from what our business core business is, which is defence, to being social toys, social. We are different from society because we have to be, because that's our role. But
it's not a place to experiment with social engineering and those sorts of things. And I do wonder. I mean, obviously, it's difficult when your service stopped a good while ago, like mine did. You sort of wonder what happened to the leadership and those experience? It seems that something's changed significantly, and something's been let down. But I think the only way we can get to the bottom of it is to have it thoroughly investigated, and independently investigated as well. It's really important.
And Mark, society has changed. So when I joined the Army in 1975, we were totally different to what we are now. And to some extent, the military has got to be aware of that and to act accordingly, but you can't treat people as you treated them back then, and probably poorly back then. But we need to understand what our society and the changes are. I can't get my 24-year-old son, who's had 7 years of service with the military, to join the RSL, no, that's wrong, to participate in the RSL.
Yeah.
He does not want a leadership role in the military. Why? He's got the quals. He was asked to go to ADFA as a digger, and this is in his peer group as well.
Yeah.
So we need to look at that for the betterment of the ADF.
Yeah. So probably not just the betterment of the ADF, but I think society in general, we need to be honest about what's going on, and because these things don't just impact the ADF, peeling away some of these issues will be very important to other emergency service organisations, and they have some relevance, I guess, across any research that we do around PTSD, suicide prevention, those sorts of things actually have an impact in a wider sphere, and it's very important. And as you mentioned, quite a lot of people, particularly in regional locations, tend to be a part of everything. They're in the Army Reserve or the one of the other forces, and they're in the CFA and part of the other volunteer groups, and so they're very well connected and community-based people, and so it does form a very important part of the fabric of local life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And and those organisations are struggling to maintain membership because they're aged. Our society has changed, so we need to look at how it's impacting both on the veteran community and the service community.
Yeah.
And I will say that, without getting politically aligned, that the current inquiry into COVID management here in Victoria is shedding light on some of the leadership issues that are pervading bureaucracies, and more to follow on that, I think.
Yeah, and I mean that's the tragedy of it. I mean, bureaucracies are not necessarily the most efficient and effective ways to get things done, but you don't want to sign it over to business either. So, you've got to work out how to deal with it, and I guess that's the role of the a good range of partnerships, I guess. So, Bill, to move towards a closeout, what are the sorts of things that you would like to see happen to improve things for regional service delivery? What are the essentials in your mind?
So I'd like to see, first of all, unity in the RSL. That's number one.
Yeah. That's
across the board, across Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, I want the bureaucrats to listen that perhaps telephones services are not the best way to manage veterans. And I want to see that decentralised and take ownership of what you're supposed to be taking ownership of, DVA. And I think that if the RSL provides a service that is relevant and of good quality and a standard, then the veterans will come. Currently, they're standoffish, the same as previous cohorts. What happened in the Vietnam era is appalling. But if we provide the service and we're good at what we do, then people will come and join us. But we need to have that support from the agencies who are deemed to provide it. And that's the focus of where I want to go.
Yeah. So
to make sure that DVA hold their head of the bargain, and to the lesser extent the ADF.
Yeah. So finally, Bill, what's your specific advice to those people who have the power to make a difference in these areas that you just spoke about?
Well, I think that this sort of conversation needs to be with the people who are in the senior bureaucratic levels. We need to have that conversation with our RSL headquarters, our RSL state headquarters, DVA, and with our governments. And our government is our local representatives, whom I might say have been excellent for us. They've done well. They do listen. The face-to-face stuff is the way to go, because you exude an empathy straight away to the veteran, that someone cares. And that's awfully difficult to get through on a Zoom meeting, and it's awfully difficult to get through on a mobile phone. Face-to-face is the way to go. That's what I'd like to see. And I'd like to see a bit of unity in the RSL nationally.
So some boots on the ground, so to speak. Really important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you need to be checking to see what your cohort is doing. You know, you need to see them, to see how they are operating and their wellness, for want of a better term.
Yeah.
And if in the process you can make a bit of fun and have a bit of entertainment and exercise, well and good. I would see a small group of 5 people in the district looking after the interests of the 23 RSLs that are in the Gippsland district, and suddenly a lot of your problems will disappear.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we had 6 acute PTSDs. We now got 5. We're managing that. DVA aren't. And that's one of the reasons why I pulled the pin, because I'm tired.
Yeah, so there's this whole issue of developing the right sort of approach to these things, such as developing I guess a universal case management approach to work out who's managing the case overall, and where is it getting referred to, and how's it being tracked and monitored and so forth. And I suspect that it's pretty difficult for a volunteer organisation out in the country to have probably got the skills, but you've got your own life to live as well, and it's not your, I guess you're not professionally, bound to provide that service. And
there's also a legal obligation, Mark. I've got an executive who are managing ill people.
Yeah.
We're not legally qualified to do that.
Yeah.
And nor are we materially qualified to do that. One's going to slip through the cracks one day, and we're going to be under the pump.
Yeah.
And that's not our job.
Well, Bill Westhead, thank you very much for that interview today. It's been very enlightening and interesting to see and hear what you've been saying about what's going on in the regional locations. I think it echoes the views of many of our viewers, and it also opens up some ideas about alternative ways to be looking at how these services can be delivered, and where the focus needs to be to actually make some improvements. So thank you very much for your contribution today.
I appreciate your time and the opportunity. Thank you very much, Mark. You're doing a great job.